May 27th, 1896. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, downtown St. Louis. The city was alive with activity, with people, with the feeling of a warm spring evening coming. Steamboat whistles echoed across the Mississippi River. Factory bells rang out as workers finished their day. And nearly 500,000 people went about their Wednesday, having no idea that in just 20 minutes, everything would change. No warning sirens sounded. No alerts were sent out because in 1896, they didn't exist yet. This is the story of how nature carved a path of destruction through one of America's greatest cities in less time than it takes to watch a TV show. 255 people dead, over 1,000 hurt, 12,000 buildings damaged or destroyed, and a city that would never be the same. But before we talk about the chaos, the terror, the unbelievable destruction, I need you to understand something. St. Louis in 1896 wasn't some small river town. This was America's fourth largest city, a booming place of new ideas, factories, and big dreams. This was a place where millionaires built mansions in Lafayette Square, where immigrants packed into apartments in Mill Creek Valley, where the Eads Bridge, one of the engineering wonders of the time, crossed the mighty Mississippi. This was a city that believed it was unstoppable. Now, let's go back to that Wednesday afternoon. Picture this. It's late afternoon. The sun's still high in the sky. Workers are leaving the massive brick factories that line the riverfront. The smell of coal smoke, fresh bread from the bakeries, horse manure from the streets. This is the scent of progress, of a city on the rise. Children are playing in the public parks. Lafayette Square, with its beautiful gardens and fountains, is dotted with nannies pushing baby carriages. Young couples walking arm in arm. Just a few miles away, in the cramped alleys of Mill Creek Valley, kids are playing stickball in the dirt streets, their laughter bouncing off the narrow apartment walls. On the Mississippi, steamboats are pulling into the docks, their massive paddle wheels churning the brown water. Workers are shouting, cargo is being loaded and unloaded. The river is the lifeblood of this city, and business is booming. In the wealthy neighborhoods, families are sitting down to early dinners. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh vegetables from a market. The wealthy of St. Louis are planning their evenings, perhaps a trip to the theater, maybe visiting friends. In the factories, the last shift is ending. Tired men wipe sweat from their faces, ready to head home. Workers are checking their pocket watches. Just another 15 minutes, and they can lock up for the night. Everything is normal, routine, predictable. But in the sky above, something is changing. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, people start to notice. The air feels different, heavier, sticky. The kind of thick humidity that makes your shirt cling to your back, that makes every breath feel like you're breathing soup. The clouds begin to thicken. What started as scattered white puffs in the morning has turned into something darker, more threatening. The sky takes on a strange greenish color, the kind of color that makes your stomach tighten, even if you don't know why. Barometers across the city begin to drop quickly. Scientists at the Weather Bureau notice it, but there's no system in place to warn anyone. No tornado watches, no emergency broadcasts, just observations written into notebooks. The wind picks up. At first, it's almost nice, a relief from the sticky heat. But then it starts to gust hard, rattling windows, sending loose papers flying down the streets. Horses whinny nervously, their ears flicking back and forth. Some people look up at the sky and feel worried. Something's not right. But what can you do? You can't just stop your life because the weather looks strange. So they keep walking, keep working, keep going about their business. In the distance to the southwest, the clouds are churning, spinning, building into something massive, something angry. But from street level, in a city full of tall buildings and smoke from 1,000 chimneys, most people can't see it yet. The storm is lining itself up like a weapon being aimed, and downtown St. Louis is directly in its path. Let me show you what's about to be hit, because understanding the layout of this disaster is important to understanding its impact. St. Louis in 1896 spreads along the western bank of the Mississippi River. The city is a patchwork of neighborhoods, each with its own character, its own story, and the tornado is about to cut through them like a knife through butter. Starting in the southwest near Tower Grove Park and Arsenal Street, you have middle-class neighborhoods, modest homes, small businesses, churches, people who work hard, who've built decent lives for themselves. Moving northeast, you hit Lafayette Square. This is where the rich people live. Massive Victorian mansions, 3 and 4 stories tall, with fancy ironwork, stained glass windows, perfect lawns. These are the homes of factory owners, bankers, lawyers, the people who run this city. Just north of Lafayette Square is Mill Creek Valley. And this is a different world. Packed apartments, narrow streets, poverty. This is where the immigrants live, the factory workers, the people scraping by on pennies a day. Irish, German, Italian families crammed into buildings that are barely standing even before the tornado hits. And then there's the riverfront. Warehouses, docks, railroad yards, the industrial heart of the city. Massive brick buildings, some of them 5, 6 stories tall. Structures that seem solid, permanent, like they could stand for 1,000 years. All of it, is about to be tested, because at about 5:15 in the afternoon, the tornado touches down just west of the city limits, and it begins its march of destruction. The sound comes first. Before anyone sees it, they hear it. And the descriptions from survivors are remarkably similar. It sounds like a massive freight train coming at you at full speed. The roar is so loud, so overwhelming that people can't hear themselves scream. The wind hits like a physical punch. One moment you're standing upright, the next you're thrown to the ground or slammed against a wall or picked up and hurled through the air like a rag doll. Windows explode inward, sending shards of glass flying like bullets. Doors are ripped off their hinges. Entire roofs are peeled off buildings like you'd peel the lid off a tin can. In the first neighborhood the tornado hits near Tower Grove Park, homes simply fall apart. One survivor, a woman named Mrs. Simmons, later said, "We were sitting in the living room when the windows burst in. My husband threw himself over me and the children. I felt the house shaking, heard this terrible roaring, and then we're just falling. The whole house collapsed around us." Mrs. Simmons survived. Her husband did not. He was hit by a falling beam and killed instantly, his body protecting his family from the worst of the debris. This scene happens dozens, hundreds of times in those first few minutes. Families huddled together, praying, screaming as their homes are torn apart around them. People running for basements, for cellars, for any shelter they can find. Some make it. Many don't. The tornado is a monster. Early guesses put it at 3/4 of a mile wide. That's massive, and it's moving fast, carving a path of total destruction through the heart of the city. Trees that have stood for 100 years are snapped like toothpicks. Brick walls 2 feet thick crumble. Horse-drawn carriages are picked up and thrown hundreds of feet. And the people, God, the people. Some are killed instantly, crushed by falling debris. Others are stabbed by flying timbers, by shards of glass, by pieces of metal torn from buildings and turned into deadly weapons. Still others are picked up by the wind and thrown. Their bodies found blocks away from where they were last seen. And the tornado is just getting started. As the tornado moves northeast, it slams into Lafayette Square. And this is where the idea of safety through wealth is shattered. These mansions, these palaces of brick and stone and iron, are supposed to be fortresses. They're built to last, built to impress, built to show the world that their owners have made it. The tornado doesn't care. One by one, these grand homes are destroyed. Walls collapse. Roofs are torn away. The beautiful stained glass windows brought from Europe explode into 1,000,000 colored pieces. The fancy ironwork, carefully made by skilled workers, is twisted into weird shapes. Inside, families are trapped. Some manage to reach their basements and survive, huddled in the darkness as the world above them is torn apart. Others aren't so lucky. One mansion, a 4-story Victorian that was the pride of its owner, a wealthy banker, is reduced to a pile of rubble in seconds. The banker, his wife, and 2 of their 3 children are killed. Their youngest daughter survives, found hours later in the wreckage, holding her mother's hand. The tornado doesn't pick favorites. Rich, poor, it doesn't matter. If you're in its path, you're at its mercy. And Lafayette Square, for all its beauty, is left looking like a war zone. Piles of brick and timber where homes once stood. Furniture scattered across lawns. Family portraits ripped from walls, fluttering in the wind like creepy confetti. One survivor, a man named Thomas Brennan, described the scene. It looked like God himself had reached down and just smashed everything. There was nothing left, nothing recognizable, just destruction. But if Lafayette Square is a tragedy, Mill Creek Valley is a catastrophe. These apartments, these cramped, poorly built structures don't stand a chance. The tornado rips through them like they're made of paper. Entire buildings collapse, trapping dozens of people inside. And here's the thing that makes this even more heartbreaking. Many of these people are immigrants. People who came to America for a better life. Who worked brutal hours in the factories for pennies. Who lived in these slums because it was all they could afford. They don't speak English. They don't understand what's happening. And when the tornado hits, they have nowhere to go, no way to escape. Families are buried alive under tons of rubble. Children are separated from their parents in the chaos, wandering the streets, crying, covered in blood and dust. The elderly, unable to move quickly, are trapped and killed. The death toll in Mill Creek Valley is shocking. Entire families wiped out. Entire buildings full of people just gone. And in the immediate aftermath, as the city begins to respond, Mill Creek Valley is overlooked. The newspapers focus on the destruction in Lafayette Square, on the wealthy victims, on the grand homes reduced to rubble. The poor, the immigrants, the people of Mill Creek Valley, they're an afterthought. It's a grim reminder that even in disaster, unfairness continues. As the tornado continues its path, it hits the industrial heart of the city, the factories, the warehouses, the railroad yards. And here the destruction takes on a different character. These are massive structures, brick buildings 5, 6 stories tall with walls 2 feet thick. They're built to withstand fire, to last for decades. They employ hundreds, sometimes thousands of workers. The tornado treats them like toys. One factory, a massive textile mill, simply collapses. The walls buckle, the roof caves in, and the entire structure pancakes down on itself. Inside, dozens of workers are still finishing their shifts. Most are killed instantly, crushed under tons of brick and machinery. Another factory, this one making railroad equipment, has its roof torn completely off. The machinery inside, massive iron presses and lathes, is exposed to the wind. Some of it is actually lifted by the wind and thrown, crashing through the walls of neighboring buildings. The railroad yards are destroyed. Freight cars, each weighing several tons, are picked up and tossed like children's toys. Some are thrown onto their sides. Others are lifted and dropped onto the tracks, crushing them. One freight car is found nearly a quarter mile from where it started, stuck in the side of a warehouse. And the workers, God, the workers. Many of them are outside when the tornado hits, loading cargo, moving equipment. They have no shelter, nowhere to hide. Some try to run. Some try to hold on to something. Anything. It doesn't matter. The wind is too strong, the debris too deadly. Bodies are found stabbed on pieces of timber, crushed under fallen walls, thrown into the river. The death toll in the industrial district alone is in the dozens, possibly more. In the chaos, it's hard to know exactly how many people were working, how many were killed. And then the tornado reaches the Mississippi River. And this is where something truly amazing happens. The Eads Bridge, completed in 1874, is one of the great engineering achievements of the 1800s. It's a massive steel and stone structure spanning the Mississippi, connecting St. Louis to East St. Louis on the Illinois side. It's built to last, built to withstand floods, ice, the constant traffic of trains and carriages. But a tornado? That was never part of the plan. The tornado hits the bridge, and for a moment, it seems like the bridge might actually fail. The wind is so strong, the force is so powerful that the entire structure shakes. Witnesses on both sides of the river watch in horror, certain that the bridge is about to collapse into the water. But it holds. The Eads Bridge, a testament to human engineering, withstands the fury of nature. However, the tornado leaves its mark. On the bridge, Investigators later find something that becomes one of the most iconic images of the disaster: a 2 by 10-inch wooden plank driven through a 5/16-inch iron plate. The force needed to do that is almost impossible to understand. It's like firing a bullet through steel. This single piece of evidence becomes a symbol of the tornado's raw, terrifying power. And as the tornado crosses the river, as it leaves Missouri behind and enters Illinois, the people of East St. Louis look up at the sky and realize it's coming for them. The Mississippi River is nearly half a mile wide at St. Louis. Half a mile of churning brown water, deep enough to swallow buildings, wide enough that on foggy days, you can barely see the opposite shore. For most tornadoes, water is a barrier. The cool surface, the change in terrain, it's often enough to weaken them. Sometimes even to make them disappear entirely. But this tornado, this beast, it doesn't weaken. If anything, it seems to grow more focused, more intense as it crosses the water. Witnesses on both shores describe something that sounds almost supernatural. The funnel, dark and massive, seems to dance across the river. The water beneath it is whipped into a frenzy, creating a spray that rises hundreds of feet into the air. Boats tied to the docks are ripped from their moorings and thrown. Some are flipped over, others simply vanish, pulled into the vortex and destroyed so completely that wreckage is never found. One steamboat captain, a man named William Hargrove, was on his vessel when the tornado crossed. He later told reporters, "I've been on this river for 30 years. I've seen floods, ice storms, every kind of weather God can throw at you. But this was like watching the end of the world. The noise was so loud I couldn't hear my own crew screaming. The boat was rocking so hard I thought we'd flip over. And the wind, it felt like the hand of God himself was trying to push us under." Captain Hargrove survived. His boat was damaged but stayed afloat. 7 other vessels weren't so lucky. The exact number of people who died on the river that day is unknown. Bodies were pulled from the water for days afterward, some so damaged they couldn't be identified. And as the tornado reaches the eastern shore, as it makes landfall in East St. Louis, Illinois, the people there have had maybe 5 minutes of warning. 5 minutes to see the destruction across the river, to hear the roar, to understand what's coming. 5 minutes to find shelter, to pray, to say goodbye to loved ones. It's not enough. It's never enough. East St. Louis in 1896 is a city of contrasts. It's smaller than its Missouri neighbor with a population of around 15,000, but it's vital to the region's economy. This is where the railroads meet, where stockyards process thousands of cattle, where factories make everything from steel to soap. It's a working-class city. The people here are tough. They work long hours in dangerous conditions. They're used to hardship, used to struggle. But nothing has prepared them for this. The tornado slams into the riverfront with devastating force. And here's where the destruction becomes even more concentrated. The funnel, which was 3/4 of a mile wide over St. Louis, has narrowed. It's now maybe a quarter mile across, but that concentration of energy makes it even more deadly. The first buildings hit are the warehouses and factories along the river. These massive brick structures, some of them brand new, are destroyed. Walls that are 3 feet thick simply explode outward. Roofs are torn off and thrown hundreds of yards. The machinery inside, tons of iron and steel, is scattered like confetti. One factory, a meat packing plant, is completely destroyed. The building collapses, trapping dozens of workers inside. But the horror doesn't end there. The plant's cold storage, filled with hanging animal carcasses, is ripped open. 4 days afterward, the area is littered with animal remains, adding to the nightmare landscape. The stockyard are destroyed. Cattle, terrified and injured, break free and stampede through the streets. Some are killed by flying debris. Others are found miles away, having run in blind panic until they collapse from exhaustion. And the people, the people of East St. Louis. Let me tell you about Mary O'Connor. She was 23 years old, a seamstress living in a small apartment above a bakery on Main Street. When the tornado hit, she was at her sewing machine, working on a dress for a customer's daughter. The building collapsed around her. She was buried under bricks, timber, plaster. Her legs were crushed. She couldn't move, couldn't call for help, because the dust was so thick she could barely breathe. She lay there for 7 hours before rescuers found her. 7 hours in the darkness, in agony, not knowing if anyone was coming, not knowing if she'd ever see daylight again. They pulled her out. Both her legs had to be cut off, but she survived. And years later, she would tell her grandchildren about the day the wind tried to kill her and how she refused to die. Then there's the Schultz family, German immigrants. They had been in America for less than 2 years. Heinrich Schultz worked at a brewery. His wife, Greta, took in laundry. They had 4 children, ranging from 2 to 10 years old. Their home, a small wooden structure in a working-class neighborhood, was directly in the tornado's path. When the wind hit, Heinrich grabbed his 2 youngest children and dove into a closet. Greta and the 2 older children tried to follow, but they didn't make it. The house exploded. That's the only word for it. One moment it was there. The next it was just gone, scattered across 3 city blocks. Heinrich and the 2 youngest survived, protected by the closet's walls. Greta and the older children were killed instantly. Their bodies found in the wreckage hours later. Heinrich never recovered. He stopped speaking, stopped working. Within a year, he was dead. Some said from a broken heart. The 2 surviving children were sent to an orphanage. These aren't just numbers. These aren't just facts in a history book. These are real people with real lives, real dreams, real families. And in 20 minutes, all of that was destroyed. And then it's over. The tornado lifts, disappears, vanishes back into the clouds as suddenly as it appeared. The roar, that terrible roar that sounded like 1,000 freight trains, stops. And the silence that follows is almost worse. It's not true silence, of course. There are sounds, moans from the injured, cries for help from people trapped in the rubble, the crackle of fires starting in the wreckage, the creaking of damaged buildings that are still standing but might collapse at any moment. But compared to the loud noise of the tornado itself, it feels like silence, like the world is holding its breath, trying to understand what just happened. Survivors come out from basements, from cellars, from whatever shelter they managed to find. And they look around at a landscape that's been transformed. Streets they've walked down 1,000 times are unrecognizable. Buildings that were landmarks that defined their neighborhoods are just gone. The dust is so thick it's hard to see more than a few feet. It coats everything. Gets in your eyes, your mouth, your lungs. People are coughing, choking, stumbling through the debris. And then the realization hits. The understanding of how big this disaster is. This isn't just one building destroyed, one street damaged. This is miles of destruction. This is thousands of people dead or injured. This is a disaster beyond anything anyone has ever seen. The shock is overwhelming. People just stand there, unable to process it. Some start to cry. Others start to laugh, a crazy, broken sound. Still others just stare, their minds unable to accept what their eyes are showing them. And then slowly, people start to move, start to act, because there are people trapped, people dying, and every second counts. Within minutes of the tornado passing, the rescue efforts begin, and they're chaotic, disorganized, desperate because there's no plan for this. No emergency services as we know them today. No FEMA, no Red Cross disaster teams, no coordinated government response. It's just people, regular people doing what they can. Neighbors dig through rubble with their bare hands, pulling out survivors, pulling out bodies. Men form bucket lines to fight the fires that are starting to spread through the wreckage. Women tear up sheets to make bandages, tend to the injured in the streets because the hospitals are either destroyed or overwhelmed. In St. Louis, the Light Battery A of the Missouri National Guard arrives within an hour. These soldiers, most of them young men with no disaster training, wade into the destruction and start pulling people out. They work through the night by torchlight, their hands bleeding, their uniforms covered in blood and dust. Bicycle riders, members of the city's cycling clubs, volunteer to carry messages between different parts of the city. With telegraph lines down and streets blocked by debris, they are the only way to communicate. They ride through the wreckage, dodging fallen timbers and live electrical wires, risking their lives to help coordinate the rescue efforts. Doctors and nurses work around the clock. The hospitals that are still standing are overwhelmed. Injured people are laid out in hallways, in waiting rooms, even on front steps. There aren't enough beds, enough supplies, enough hands to treat everyone. One doctor, a man named Samuel Winters, performed 32 amputations in a single night. 32, legs crushed beyond saving, arms mangled by debris. He worked by lamplight with minimal pain medicine, doing what he could to save lives. By dawn, he collapsed from exhaustion and had to be carried to a bed himself. And through it all, there's the horror of discovery. Every piece of rubble moved might reveal a survivor or a body. Families searched desperately for missing loved ones, calling out names, digging through the wreckage with bleeding hands. Some find their family members alive. Others find them dead. And still others find nothing. No trace, no body, no closure. Just absence. In the hours and days following the tornado, the true size of the disaster becomes clear. And it's worse than anyone initially thought. The official death toll is 255, but that number is almost certainly too low, because in 1896, record-keeping isn't what it is today, especially for the poor, for immigrants, for traveling workers who have no family in the area. How many people were in those apartments in Mill Creek Valley? How many workers were in the factories? How many people were on boats on the river? Nobody knows. Not exactly. Bodies are found for weeks after the tornado. Some in the rubble of buildings, some in the river, washed up on the banks miles downstream. Some so badly damaged they can't be identified. Mass graves are dug. In East St. Louis, a trench is dug and dozens of unidentified bodies are buried together. There's no time for individual funerals, no resources for proper burials. It's a tragedy made worse by indignity. The injured number over 1,000. And remember, this is 1896. Medical care is basic by today's standards. Antibiotics don't exist. Infection is a death sentence. Many people who survive the initial tornado die days or weeks later from infected wounds. And then there are the mental wounds. Today, we call it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But in 1896, there's no name for it, no treatment, no understanding. Survivors have nightmares. They can't sleep because every time they close their eyes, they hear that roar, feel that wind. They jump at loud noises. They can't go into buildings because they're terrified of being trapped. Children refuse to leave their parents' sides, clinging to them in terror. One woman, a survivor from Lafayette Square, stopped speaking entirely. For 3 years, she didn't say a single word. Her family thought she'd lost her mind. But then one day, she started talking again. And the first thing she said was, "I can still hear it. Every day, I can still hear it." Let's talk about the physical damage, because the numbers are almost impossible to understand. More than 12,000 buildings are damaged or destroyed. 12,000. That's not just homes. That's churches, schools, factories, warehouses, shops, offices. That's the infrastructure of 2 cities shattered. The damage is estimated at over $10 million in 1896 money. To put that in perspective, adjusted for inflation, that's somewhere around $5 billion today. $5 billion for a single tornado in a single afternoon. Entire neighborhoods are gone. In some areas, there's nothing left but foundations and rubble. You can stand in the middle of what used to be a street and see for blocks because all the buildings are just gone. The railroad yards are destroyed. Miles of track are twisted and torn up. Freight cars are scattered like toys. The economic impact is immediate and severe. St. Louis is a major rail hub, and with the yards destroyed, commerce grinds to a halt. The factories, the economic engine of the region, are crippled. Some are destroyed entirely. Others are so badly damaged they'll take months or years to rebuild. Thousands of people are suddenly out of work with no income, no way to support their families. And the homeless. Thousands of people, maybe as many as 10,000, are left without shelter. Their homes are destroyed, and they have nowhere to go. Refugee camps spring up in parks, in open fields, tents, and makeshift shelters. Families huddled together, trying to survive. The city sets up relief stations distributing food, water, blankets. But it's not enough. It's never enough. People are hungry, cold, desperate, and winter is only a few months away. And then something strange happens. Something that in hindsight seems almost wrong. People start coming to see the destruction. Tourists, sightseers, curiosity seekers. They come from all over the region, from neighboring states, even from across the country. They want to see the devastation, to walk through the ruins, to witness the aftermath of one of the worst disasters in American history. In the weeks following the tornado, over 140,000 people visit the damaged areas. 140,000. They come by train, by carriage, on foot. They wander through the rubble, taking photographs, collecting souvenirs, gawking at the destruction. Some of them are genuinely trying to help, bringing supplies, offering assistance. But many are just tourists, treating a disaster zone like an attraction. The newspapers of the day are filled with advertisements for tornado tours. Business people set up viewing platforms, charge admission to see the worst-hit areas. Street vendors sell food and drinks to the crowds. It's awful. For the survivors, it's a nightmare. They're trying to rebuild their lives, trying to find their dead, trying to cope with unimaginable trauma. And there are crowds of people wandering through, pointing, staring, treating their suffering like entertainment. One survivor, a man who lost his wife and 2 children, was quoted in a newspaper. They come here with their cameras and their picnic baskets, and they stare at us like we're animals in a zoo. They don't see people. They don't see pain. They just see a show. It's a dark reminder that even in the face of tragedy, human nature can be ugly. But life goes on. It has to. And slowly, painfully, the cities begin to rebuild. The debris is cleared block by block. It takes months. Thousands of tons of brick, timber, twisted metal. All of it has to be hauled away. Some of it is saved, reused. Most of it is just dumped in empty lots, in the river, anywhere it can go. New buildings start to go up, but they're different from what came before. Architects and engineers studying the damage realize that the old methods of construction aren't enough. Buildings need to be stronger, more resistant to wind damage. New building codes are proposed, though it takes years for them to be fully put in place. Structures are built with stronger foundations, with better bracing, with materials that can withstand higher wind speeds. The neighborhoods are rebuilt, but they're changed. Some areas, particularly the poorest neighborhoods, never fully recover. The people who live there, already struggling, don't have the resources to rebuild. They move away, scattered to other parts of the city, to other cities entirely. Lafayette Square, the wealthy neighborhood, is rebuilt relatively quickly. The rich have the resources, the insurance, the means to restore their homes. Within a few years, the mansions are back, as grand as ever. But there's a shadow over the neighborhood now, a sense of vulnerability that never quite goes away. The factories are rebuilt. The railroad yards are repaired. Commerce resumes. But it takes time, months, years. And in the meantime, the economic impact is devastating. Businesses fail. People lose their jobs, their savings, their futures. But the tornado's impact goes beyond the physical, beyond the economic. It has political consequences that reshape the city for decades. In the years leading up to 1896, there's been a growing reform movement in St. Louis. Middle-class citizens frustrated with corruption and bad management have been pushing for changes in city government. They want better services, more accountability, a government that works for all citizens, not just the wealthy and connected. The tornado seems like it might be a reason for change. The disaster exposes the city's weaknesses, the problems with its infrastructure, the failure of its government to protect its citizens. But in the 1897 elections, just months after the tornado, the reform candidates are defeated soundly. The old political machine, the people in power, they win. Why? Because in the chaos and trauma of the aftermath, people crave stability. They want familiar faces, familiar systems, even if those systems are broken. Change feels risky, dangerous, and people have had enough danger to last a lifetime. It's a reminder that disasters don't always lead to progress. Sometimes they lead to going backward, to a retreat into the familiar, even when the familiar is broken. The tornado also exposes the deep inequalities in the city. The wealthy neighborhoods are rebuilt quickly with government support and private money. The poor neighborhoods, they're left to fend for themselves. The difference is stark, and it creates resentment that simmers for years. And then there are the stories we'll never know. The people whose deaths were never recorded, whose names were never written down, whose lives were erased by the tornado and by history. How many people died on the river that day? We don't know. Bodies were found, but many were never identified. Some were probably never found at all, swept downstream, buried in the mud. How many immigrants living in those crowded apartments died without anyone knowing their names? They came to America for a better life, and they died in a disaster that barely acknowledged their existence. How many traveling workers, people passing through the city, were killed? They had no family in the area, no one to report them missing. They just vanished. The official death toll is 255, but the real number, it could be 300, 400. We'll never know. And that's a tragedy in itself, because every one of those people had a story. They had dreams, fears, loves, losses. They mattered. But history has forgotten them. But from tragedy comes, if not good, then at least progress. The 1896 tornado becomes a turning point in the study of severe weather. Before this disaster, tornadoes were poorly understood. They were seen as random, unpredictable acts of God. There's no system for tracking them, no way to warn people, no understanding of how they formed or why. The St. Louis tornado changes that. Meteorologists study the event carefully. They interview survivors, examine the damage patterns, try to understand the mechanics of what happened. They realize that tornadoes aren't random. They form under specific weather conditions. They follow predictable patterns, and most importantly, they can be detected given the right tools and knowledge. This leads to the development of the first tornado warning systems. It takes decades, but eventually the United States develops a network of weather stations, radar systems, and communication networks that can detect severe weather and warn people in its path. Today, when a tornado is approaching, we get warnings on our phones, on TV, on the radio. We have time to take shelter, to protect ourselves. That system, imperfect as it is, saves lives, thousands of lives every year. And it exists in part because of what happened in St. Louis on May 27, 1896. So what's the legacy of the Great Cyclone? How did it change St. Louis, change the region, change America? Physically, the tornado reshaped the city. The path of destruction is still visible today if you know where to look. Certain neighborhoods never fully recovered. The demographics shifted, the architecture changed. But the deeper impact is harder to measure. The tornado shattered the city's sense of being unstoppable. St. Louis had been booming, growing, convinced of its own importance and permanence. And in 20 minutes, nature reminded everyone how fragile it all was. The disaster also exposed the city's inequalities, its failures, its weaknesses. And while it didn't lead to immediate reform, it planted seeds. Over the following decades, St. Louis slowly, painfully began to address some of those issues. Better building codes, improved emergency services, more attention to the needs of all citizens, not just the wealthy. The tornado also became part of the city's identity. It's a shared trauma, a collective memory. Even today, over a century later, people in St. Louis talk about the Great Cyclone. It's part of the city's story, part of its DNA. And on a national level, the disaster helped spur the development of modern weather science and disaster response. The lessons learned in St. Louis, the understanding gained from studying the tornado, contributed to systems that protect millions of people today. So here's the question that haunts everyone who studies this and continued disaster. Could it happen again? Could a tornado of this size hit a major American city today? The answer is yes. Absolutely yes. Tornadoes don't care about city limits. They don't avoid urban areas. And while our warning systems are vastly better than they were in 1896, they're not perfect. Imagine a tornado like the one that hit St. Louis, striking a modern city. The death toll would likely be lower thanks to better construction, better warnings, better emergency response. But the damage, it would be catastrophic. Modern cities are more densely populated. They have more infrastructure, more complexity. A tornado ripping through downtown Dallas or Nashville or Oklahoma City would cause billions of dollars in damage. It would disrupt power grids, communication networks, transportation systems. The economic impact would be staggering. And there's another factor: climate change. As the planet warms, the conditions that create severe weather, including tornadoes, are becoming more common. We're seeing more intense storms, more unpredictable weather patterns. The question isn't if a major tornado will hit an American city again. It's when and whether we'll be ready. May 27th, 1896, 5:15 in the afternoon. A tornado touches down just west of St. Louis, Missouri. 20 minutes later, it's over. The tornado has disappeared, vanished back into the clouds. But in those 20 minutes, 255 people died. Over 1,000 were injured. 12,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed. 2 cities were shattered. And the ripples of that disaster spread outward, touching thousands of lives, reshaping communities, changing the course of history in ways both large and small. This is the story of the Great Cyclone, a story of destruction and survival, of tragedy and strength, of a moment when nature reminded humanity of its power, its fury, its complete indifference to our plans and dreams. But it's also a story of hope, because in the aftermath, those people came together. They helped each other, supported each other, rebuilt together. They learned from the disaster, used that knowledge to protect future generations. The Great Cyclone of 1896 was one of the deadliest tornadoes in American history. But it wasn't the end of St. Louis. The city survived, recovered, grew. Today, St. Louis is a thriving city, home to millions of people. But if you walk through Lafayette Square, if you stand in the right spot and look around, you can almost feel it. The ghost of that day, the memory of the wind, the roar, the terror. And you remember, nature is powerful. Nature is unpredictable. And nature doesn't care. In just 20 minutes, the wind rewrote the map. In just 20 minutes, hundreds of lives ended and thousands more were changed forever. In just 20 minutes, everything changed.